culture had a detrimental effect on the way they approached the COVID crisis, according to Helen McNamara.
Yes, that was very much one of the key points, I think, in Helen's evidence today. And I think that worked on two levels. One, that it demoralised the women working in the Cabinet Office. And really interestingly, Helen said that it was an issue raised the moment she came back from being ill, that as they'd moved into sort of crisis management mode in the Cabinet Office, the sort of way it was running really changed. And a lot of the women there felt they weren't being heard, they were being left out of meetings, they were being talked over in meetings, just weren't being listened to. So that's one dimension. That was a sort of personal dimension, if you like. But the second dimension of that was just that she gave this sense that actually the people making the decisions, remember there was that very small band of ministers, the sort of 4 top ministers who were making decisions at that stage. They were all men probably with a certain lifestyle. And she just felt that whole range of women's issues or women's concerns, or concerns that actually just would be concerns of normal members of the public, just weren't being raised at all, not featuring in those raised from things like guidance for pregnant women, access to abortion, thinking about domestic violence, to issues about the consequences, for mothers working, parents working, if schools were closed, if childcare wasn't available.
Do you think there's maybe a lesson that needs to be drawn from this, that there needs to be more women in higher positions of power in government?
Well, I think it was very interesting. It was very striking. We always thought, we used to note how few women ever spoke at those big COVID briefings. And I think, it is a point to not just have women, but actually to have a big variety of lived experiences. One of the things that really struck me in Helen's testimony was that many of the issues that she thought needed to be addressed came not up when they were discussing it in government, in really quite narrow circles in government, but the really difficult questions, the questions that exposed real gaps in the strategy, came when she and the Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Scientific Advisor were briefing the opposition. And it seemed almost as though the opposition were raising questions that no one within government was bringing. They were sort of, querying things and saying, how does this really work in practice? So I do think it's a big warning about the dangers of drawing policymakers, that's civil servants and ministers, from far too narrow a stratum of society, whether that's race, whether that's women, sex, women, men, or whether it's just sort of lived experience, as we call it, family circumstances. And also that's one of the really interesting things behind the big push as well to disperse the civil service around the country, is to have people who don't just live in central London, used to working like that, get the tube to work and things like that, but people who live in other parts of the country as well.
It's been a wee while since you worked in government. Was it a sexist culture like the one we heard about today that you experienced when you were there, or do you think this is very much associated with the Johnson years?
Well, Helen McNamara herself said that she thought it would have been very different under Theresa May or under any Prime Minister she'd worked for before, that there really was sort of a bit of Johnsonian exceptionalism. Generally, I think the civil service is generally quite a good place to work for women, though Helen did say she thought it was endemically sexist. I don't think it's necessarily more sexist than many work environments, and the civil service has done quite a good job of promoting a lot of senior women, far more than when I worked there. So women now run departments. When I was there, it was very few senior women around. So I think that has changed to quite some extent. But I do think there's a style thing, and I think the Johnson very macho style with his, if you like, his sort of vote leave advisors was very different, I think, to the styles under Theresa May, under David Cameron. But I do think there was a sort of, the time I experienced sort of very macho style in government was under the new Labour government, when Tony Blair came in, Alistair Campbell and his advisors, but even more notably when I was working in the Treasury with Gordon Brown and his team, who, I remember once walking into a meeting and it just felt like you'd walked into the men's changing room in a gym by mistake and you just wanted to get out of there as soon as possible.
That sounds horrific. Jill, thank you so much for your time. The inquiry continues and we'll maybe speak to you again in the coming weeks. Thank you very much indeed for your time this evening.